Hello, my name's Shaun speaking to you from my studio here in Melbourne, Australia, and very pleased to know that my book, Tales from the Inner City, has been selected as one of the Greenaway greats. I've been asked to say a few words about what the book is about and my inspirations. I guess it's always difficult to summarise because these things are created over a long process. This book took me about 5 years to produce. It has a number of oil paintings and short stories. The stories all have something in common. They are all about animals in urban environments and not necessarily in a normal situation, but in something that's quite surreal and dreamlike. And I think it's best if I read you one of the stories. Some of them are very short, and that's a style of writing that I've come to love after working for many years as a writer and illustrator, and trying to figure out what's the simplest and shortest way that I can tell a relatively complex story. And in this case, I managed to reduce the story down to a single paragraph, and the story is called Orca. Although in this book the stories don't have titles, they just have silhouettes of the animals as titles, because of course animals don't have names for themselves, at least not in a human language. This is the painting for the story. So in this book, each story has a large painting. All of these were quite big oil paintings, about the size of the average dining room table, and many of them produced here in this studio. And sometimes I'll start with an image, sometimes I'll start with a story idea, but either way I tend to work backwards and forwards from image to story to develop an idea. I don't always know what I'm doing until right at the very end. So this is the story. We took the orca from the sea and put it in the sky. It was just so beautiful up there, so inspiring. But the calls of the mother never stopped. From a cold and foreign sea, her subsonic wavelength penetrated all concrete, steel and urban clamour, reverberated through pipes and sewers, kept us awake all night and broke our hearts. We knew we had done something unforgivable. We promised to set things right. But so many years have passed and the mother is still calling out. So many years have passed and the orca is still in the sky. We just don't know how to get it down. So that to me is a complete story, believe it or not. And I think it actually started with an image, which was the idea of an orca floating in the sky, and that was the sort of dreamlike impression that I've been carrying around for some years, particularly a whale gently brushing up against the side of a skyscraper in the middle of the night, and this was haunting me. I didn't know what it meant, but I just start writing, and often with my stories I also don't worry too much about explanation. It doesn't matter how the orca is in the sky, it's more about how would you feel if such a thing were real. What if that happened? How would people respond? And I feel that the stories are quite real that way because at the end of the day it's about our reaction to things, our very honest reaction. And this story also came from watching I realised much later that the idea came from watching a documentary called Blackfish, which was about an orca named Tillicum, which was captured and taken away from his mother as a calf and raised in SeaWorld, and basically developed a number of psychological disorders and could never be returned back to the wild. So it was a very, very sad story. A great documentary which actually did a lot to change people's attitudes towards certain animals in captivity. I'm sure that will expand over time, but realising that many of the practices that we inflict upon animals are actually quite barbaric, but we don't know that until we stop and look and listen. And so I've been asked to suggest a creative exercise that you could do in relation to my book, and I think this is actually quite an easy book to base a creative writing exercise on, whether it's illustration or writing or both, which I certainly recommend, working backwards and forwards between pictures and words and coming up with better and better ideas. And that is to just think about an animal, particularly an animal that might not be familiar to you, and put that animal in an environment that is very familiar to you. So imagine, this is a technique that I use a lot in my own storytelling. Imagine a strange animal from an exotic place that is in the place where you might have had breakfast this morning, or somewhere on the way to school, or somewhere on the way to work, or somewhere that you might visit, like a supermarket, a really ordinary place that you wouldn't actually normally think to write about because it's so ordinary and boring and day to day. Put a strange thing into that situation, and the most important people is have everybody else accept it as normal, and then think about how you would react. So in the case of this story, putting an orca in the sky, and that's kind of like accepted as normal, and everyone's like, wow, that's amazing, look at that, that's such a fun thing. But how would you feel about it if there was a whale floating in the sky and it could never come down, and you kept hearing the calls of the mother all the time? So I would suggest writing a list first, so don't always go with your first idea. I usually go with my second, third, or 17th idea, which is the good one. A list of different animals, and not necessarily animals that you like or would think about ordinarily. So often we forget about insects, worms, amphibians, and other things like that. Take them from one environment, whether it's a jungle, a desert, or ocean, Antarctica, or whatever. Relocate them in a place that's very familiar to you, and then just start writing about your encounter with that creature, what happens, something else that might happen to that creature. So another story in this book is about a rhinoceros that's on a freeway and how people react to that, and in most cases just with annoyance and frustration. But it can also be positively, like if you decide to care for that creature or look after it, you decide to take it home, and then some of the inconvenient problems that might arise when you make that decision, when you make a good moral decision, it can create further problems. Then what do you do? This is always an intriguing starting point for storytelling for me. So I'll leave that with you. I hope you enjoy reading this book if you haven't already, and having a think about stories. I hope they might inspire you to draw, whether you're already quite an artist or it's something you haven't tried before. I certainly recommend trying it alongside writing to help you develop ideas. And all the best. Enjoy reading the other books on this selection, and have a wonderful World Book Day. Bye.